Hi folks, I'm Dick Fairburn. I've been researching active shooter events in this country and training police officers to respond to them for more than 20 years. I get some pretty strong opinions on why these things happen and what we should do to minimize them, help reduce the number of killings we have in this country. If you want to hear what I have to say, stick around for a minute. Hi folks, my name is Dick Fairburn. I want to talk to you today about active shooter incidents. Just 2 days ago we saw the shooting at Nashville at a Christian elementary school. And once again we're shocked by the needless loss of lives, especially young innocent lives in this country. I have more than 40 years of public safety experience in both police and fire, and I have been studying these active killer situations for more than 20 years. I have been training police response to this for that long as well. Nashville is not the first, obviously, and it won't be the last active shooter situation we deal with in this country. Firearms were used in this one, but firearms are not always used. We see cutting instruments, we see vehicles used for mass killings as well. An interesting addition to this incident is that the Nashville killer not only went into the school and killed 3 adults and 3 children with gunfire, but then she took a position in the second floor front windows of the school, prepared to ambush arriving police units. Most of these people planned their incidents fairly well. She probably assumed where the police would be responding from, and she fired into a number of those police vehicles as they arrived on the scene. That makes the actions of the Nashville Police Department even more impressive, as they got into that school very rapidly and they neutralized the situation. I've done some research looking, is the United States #1 in mass killings? And frankly, the statistics are not easy to pin down. A lot of the studies are politically biased one way or another. One incident showed the United States in number 11 position in terms of mass killings, but that's a dated survey. Others from the left side of the political spectrum try to make it out that this is almost a uniquely U.S. problem. It is not. Here's the important point. Here's my philosophy. One of these incidents is too many. What can we do to stop them? And as first responders, what do we expect our first responders to do to stop them once they happen? So let's look at the problem. Let's identify what's going on out there. And I'm talking in very generic numbers. I'm not pinning down specific statistics to anything. Roughly, these incidents break down into 3 different categories, and they're roughly equal in numbers. About 1/3 of them occur in schools. 1/3 occur in church facilities. Nashville checked both of those boxes. The other third take place in workplaces or entertainment settings, such as the country music festival that was attacked in Las Vegas, or some gay entertainment places that have been attacked recently in California. As I said, most of these are committed with firearms, but a number also have cutting instruments and vehicles. Most of the killers have multiple weapons. It's very common for them to have more than one firearm, as well as knives, and generally a lot of ammunition, a lot more than they actually use. It is not being exclusively done with AR-15 or what the media calls assault rifles. Handguns are actually the most common firearm used. However, we know that semi-automatic rifles are being used frequently. From what I saw in the footage from Nashville, there were 2 of those weapons carried by the shooter there. In a lot of the early school shootings, and when I say early, I'm talking about Columbine in 1999 kind of as the watershed event that changed the way police respond. Typically, the killers in those incidents self-inflicted before it was over. They committed suicide rather than face the music. What we're seeing now is really a little bit different class of killer. They're willing to fight to the end to gain as many points on their killing spree as they can. And they are willing to exchange fire with the police sometimes. That happened in Uvalde, Texas, where two officers received minor wounds when the suspect shot through the door at them. Again, in Nashville, where the lady set up an ambush setting over the arriving police cars. What's the profile of these people? It's not exact. It's not that easy to pin down, but the shooters are almost exclusively male, just a handful of female shooters in U.S. history. They're usually young, under 30, but as we saw in some of the incidents recently in California, one where there was a fairly elderly man. These people are usually what I would call outside of mainstream society. They don't fit in with the rest of us in one way or another. Very high likelihood, almost completely, these people have some mental health issues. There's a very high likelihood that they are on SSRI drugs. These are an anti-depressant kind of drug. A lot of the research says that these drugs have a tendency to dehumanize the people who take them. They lower their value for human life. A wide variety of these people on there. Big Pharma, of course, is not going to talk about it, and I've seen very little of that on the mainstream media. There's a very high likelihood that the shooters are gamers, typically violent shooting games. A retired Army Ranger by the name of Dave Grossman, he was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, and a psychologist. He wrote a book, Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill. And in that, he lines out very heavily how these people are desensitized by the violent shooting games. It becomes a game to them to the point that shooting in real life almost becomes a game to them. I don't think this is making killers, but it is enabling those whose minds are already a little broken. And it also gives them great hand-eye coordination. In one incident in Kentucky a number of years ago, a young man went into a preschool Christian prayer group with a handgun, shot a number of people, and most of them were headshots. Making headshots with a handgun on moving targets is a very difficult marksmanship problem. But the game this kid played the most gave double points for headshots, so he had practiced that extensively. One source today reports that 4 of these incidents in the last 5 years were by trans shooters, which is what happened in Nashville just a couple of days ago. Many of the male shooters in these events consider themselves to be incels. If you don't know what incels are, Google it. It stands for involuntarily celibate. And these young men are unable to get dates. They are highly resentive of very attractive women. They're very hateful of the jocks that they think are able to date those kind of women. And as I say, these people are just a little bit outside mainstream society. Normally, these shooters leave multiple warning signs of their dangerous behavior. These warning signs frequently go unreported. People just brush them off. They're leaving social media. They're leaving manifestos around their homes or workplaces. The signs are there. As I said, often they're not taken seriously or not even reported. But in the Parkland, Florida shooting, that young man was reported to both the local police and the FBI by people who feared he was going to be a school shooter. And in both cases, by the local police and the FBI, those reports were dismissed out of hand. They had a chance to stop that shooting and didn't. As a retired police chief, I'm going to tell you, they have to be taken seriously. Even if we go a little bit too far in terms of trying to interrupt these things, we have to take these warning signs very seriously. As we've already seen in less than 2 days, most of these active shooter events rapidly become political. And the primary goal of the people who make them political is to ban guns. It's important to note that virtually all of the firearms in these events are either legally purchased or obtained from family members. These are not crime guns. These are generally not theft guns. The people who bought them shouldn't have been able to buy them, so that's a breakdown in our background check system, and I will refer to that a little bit later on. The police response that you see, in Nashville, the police response was outstanding. In about 11 or 12 minutes from the 911 call, the officers had arrived. As I said, they were fired upon when they arrived. They made entry into the school. and the body camera footage is out there on the internet for you to see. Within 11 minutes, I believe it was 11 or 12 minutes, they neutralized the shooter, and all the killing stopped. Prior to the Columbine incident, Columbine school attack in 1999, the best practices at the time used by law enforcement was to contain, isolate, and negotiate a shooting of this type, and wait for the SWAT team. Ordinary police officers, patrol police officers, were not trained to go in and deal with this kind of threat. After the Columbine incident, the law enforcement profession said, we can't wait anymore. We have to change the way we do business. We have to prepare to go in and neutralize the killing. Current best practices is an immediate entry, hunt and neutralize the killer. In the last few years, this is combined with the fire service in a technique known as rescue task force training. This combines a team of generally medical trained firefighters surrounded by police officers as a security team, and they're willing to go into the hot zone, into the kill zone of these incidents, and get much more rapid medical treatment to the victims. This became an incident in Aurora, Colorado, at the Batman movie shooting, where fire had traditionally been trained not to go to the hot zone until the police had made it safe, and sometimes that can take hours. So after that, we saw this rescue task force training come online to get better practices in taking that medical treatment into them. We've seen a couple of very terrible failed police responses to active shooter incidents. About 4 years ago in Parkland, Florida, a number of officers were on scene. None of them took any action to stop the shooter until much later in the event. Last year, in Uvalde, Texas, we saw 327 estimated police officers on scene by the end of the day. Yet there was an 88-minute period where no action was taken by the police. That is absolutely unacceptable. Even if the shooter were not actively trying to kill more people, you have wounded casualties in there that are bleeding out. We will never know how many people died at Uvalde that should have been rescued. That information is being very closely held. But someone should have been in there and put a stop to that long before they did. Recent police actions at school shootings in St. Louis a few months ago and in Nashville just 2 days ago show us the absolutely ideal kind of response we're looking for. In St. Louis, a high school was being shot up by someone, and within 11 minutes of the 911 call, the police had made entry, found the killer, and put a stop to the killing spree. That's what we have to do. It's riskier for the police officers, but I'll tell you what, if there's a police officer who is not willing to risk his life to save an elementary student in Nashville, they need to find another line of work. I want to talk about concealed carry holders and how they fit into this active shooting kind of situation. Several active killers in the last few years have been stopped by citizens with a concealed weapons permit. One was in Indiana just last year, where a young man engaged a killer at a food court in a mall. He hit him multiple times at 40 yards with a handgun. That's an extraordinary marksmanship accomplishment to do that. Most police officers would be hard-pressed to make those kind of shots under stress at that distance, but he put a stop to it. Here's the bad part. While several active killer situations have been stopped by people with a concealed carry permit, several of those concealed carry shooters, essentially heroes who stopped the killing, several of them have been shot by police when they made their response, including shot and killed. So it's important to talk to the concealed carry people and say, what do you need to do? If you get involved in an active shooter situation, God bless you, because you're probably going to save lives. But there are things you need to consider. One question is, should you carry in church? Some states prohibit that. The NYSERPA versus Bruin Supreme Court ruling last year is eventually, I think, going to open up many more places where concealed carry people can go armed. But some states do limit your ability to carry in a church. I think you should carry in a church simply because of the large number of incidents that have occurred in church facilities. But you need to check. Many churches nowadays have voluntary security teams made up of people who attend church regularly and have a concealed weapon permit. If your church has such a security team, then I would suggest if you want to be involved, you should join the team. But it's not going to be a good situation if that team steps in to take action and you are trying to take your own independent action at the same time. Confusion reigns supreme at these kind of attacks, and so avoid that if you can. How about carrying in schools? I said about a third of these shootings occur in schools. Generally, you're not able to carry concealed in schools. Either state or federal statutes prohibit that. Again, that might be changing. If you're bending the rules and you have a firearm with you and you have the ability to save lives, if it were me, I would try to save those lives. And if there's going to be legal consequences after that, then I will deal with those as they happen. If you are a concealed carry person and you get involved in these active shooter situations, you have to understand that they are horribly confusing. And to quote Dave Grossman, the Lieutenant Colonel of the Rangers, they're going to come in like thunder. These police officers are going to be high stressed. They're going to be looking for anyone with a gun, and they're probably going to neutralize anyone they find with a gun. So if you have taken action in an active shooter scene, then you need to get that weapon out of view as soon as you can. Either reholster, get it on the ground. There may be a situation where you have to hold someone at gunpoint until the police can get there and take over the situation. If that happens, then do everything you absolutely can to make those police officers understand you're the good guy. Put your hands up. Put the weapon down. And whatever you do, obey all police commands. If you don't, your life is at risk. If they're going to handcuff you, if they're going to search you, if they're going to arrest you, obey their commands. Do what you are told to do. We will sort this out later. If you do not obey their commands, you are putting your own life at risk. So accept what they tell you to do. Provide the police with enough information to show that you stopped the killing, that you are the good guy. Once you've done that, then I give you the advice to remain silent, which is your right to do, until you have legal representation. If you have been involved in one of these incidents, I assume you have some form of concealed carry insurance. You need to notify your insurance provider as quickly as you can. Last week I was in St. Louis at the ILETA conference. That's the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. It's an annual conference. Several hundred police officers are there. I presented some training that we put together at the Illinois State Police Academy when I worked there to teach leaders in law enforcement, senior officers, corporals, sergeants, how to form active shooter response teams, get in there as quickly as they can, and deal with the killer. Nashville is a great example of how that should work, but unfortunately some agencies don't have a climate of leadership, a team-based working format that we saw work to our advantage in St. Louis and Nashville. In addition to what we have done with rapid deployment or active shooter response training in the last few years, as I mentioned, is to bring together the fire service or the emergency medical technicians and paramedics into rescue task force training. So I'd like to make some recommendations. We need to do periodic rapid deployment training and rescue task force training for first responders in every community. They need to be up to speed on this. They need to be fresh in the training and ready to go. We need leadership training for our police to put these teams together and effectively go in and hunt down the killers. At both Parkland, Florida and Uvalde, Texas, we saw police officers there. We can only describe their activities as vapor lock. They got there. They did not take the kind of action they needed. There's a multitude of reasons for that, and that will be sorted out as time goes on. Another big issue, perhaps the biggest of all recommendation that I can make, is that we need to update the mental health system in this country to get these people into the system that will stop them from being able to pass a background check and buy a firearm. As I said, most of these things are bought legally. They're bought by people who have no business buying a firearm. I'm very pro-gun, have been all my life, but there are people in the country, people in the world who should not have access to firearms. And we are not making that system work here now. I blame that on the mental health system. As a police officer, almost every state has some sort of a emergency detention law. If someone is determined by the police to be a threat to themselves or others, we have the right to bring them in custody, and typically for up to 72 hours. But in my experience, having done several of these in both Illinois and Wyoming, within a few hours the mental health professionals show up, and then they tell us these people are fine, there was no reason for them to be brought in. The problem is they see them when they have calmed down. They don't see them, as the police officers do, in full panic mode. And so these people are able to kind of hold a mask up and not show the truly unhealthy state that their mind is in. So those mental health professionals are very reluctant to send in the information necessary to block these people on a background check. That has to be changed. That's a culture change for the mental health profession. It has to be made legal for them to do so, and then it must be made mandatory for them to do so. The system is there. The background check system run by the FBI is there to stop these kind of people from buying guns. And that system has totally collapsed. I want to throw in one more recommendation that I have, and this dates back a ways. Following the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut, I was writing a regular monthly column for policeone.com website. I wrote an article after Sandy Hook, and I suggested the creation of a nationwide program that I called, for lack of a better term, the Minuteman program. Resurrect the idea of Minutemen from our history's past. We knew that schools were vulnerable. Many schools have school resource officers, but many schools do not. My community, where I recently retired from as a police chief, we had one school resource officer who floats between all of the elementary, middle school, and high school facilities. Every school could stand to have an armed protector in there. There is a ready supply of these people out there who I am totally sure will volunteer to participate. A number of years ago, President George Bush signed a law. It has been updated and improved several times since then. That's called the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act. Anyone in law enforcement who leaves service in good standing with 10 or more years of service in law enforcement, they can now carry concealed weapons in all 50 states and 6 territories. They have essentially a nationwide concealed carry card. There are hundreds of thousands of retired police officers out there who can carry these weapons. They're well trained, and I guarantee you they would volunteer readily to sit in the schools, because a lot of them are going to have grandchildren in those schools. There is no reason we couldn't have an armed protector in every school every day at absolutely no cost. Now, we would need to build a system to vet these people, to conduct some periodic training for these people, to have them work with the school resource officers and coordinate their activities, not complicate what each other does. So there are some hurdles to get over, but the system would work and the volunteers are there. There's another very large pool of volunteers that I'm sure we could include in this to get the numbers over the top, and that would be retired senior military personnel. If they already have a concealed weapons card, we're going to give them a little bit of legal training about where they stand. We could plug them right into this Minuteman system. I've promoted this for more than 10 years now, and it's never got off the ground. But I think it's a good idea, and I think it can help protect a lot of kids in these schools. These are my thoughts. This is 40 years of law enforcement and fire service work. It's a lot of research and a lot of training of police officers to be prepared to go to these incidents. We need to stop these things. We will never stop them all, but by watching for those warning signs, we can stop many. By including the mental health information in the background check system, we can stop even more. And with the Minuteman program, we could put protectors in those schools that if someone slips through those cracks and shows up there to kill our kids, they'll be there to hopefully put a stop to it. Put your comments below. Tell me what you think about this. I think it's time that we took some very positive steps to stop this. And as much as the progressives want to do it through banning guns, the sensible among us know that banning guns would do absolutely nothing to lessen this problem. So let's take some actions that can make a positive difference. Thank you very much. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.